You think you know him? The red coat. The bearskin.
The dead-eyed stare aimed at nothing, at everything, at the middle distance where tourists and pigeons and time itself blur into irrelevance.
You've seen the videos, lads in football shirts hollering in his face. Girls pressing their cheeks against his.
Some bloke in a novelty sombrero doing a little dance 2 inches from the man's nose while his mates film it and laugh themselves sideways. And the guard doesn't flinch, which doesn't blink.
Doesn't exist, apparently, and so you start to think he's a prop. A costume on a body.
A very disciplined mannequin bolted to the floor outside a palace that mostly exists for postcards. That is what they thought too, the 4 of them, on a Tuesday in October, with a dare. That started TBH, as a joke, and a phone pointed at a man who had not moved in 47 minutes.
They were wrong.
Not wrong in the way people are wrong about magic tricks, where the reveal is fun and everyone claps.
Wrong in the way that matters, the kind of wrong that rearranges something behind your sternum and doesn't go back. This, I mean, isn't a story about a soldier standing still.
It is a story about what standing still costs, and what a man will do, in the span of 4 seconds, when the cost becomes worth paying.
What happened in those 4 seconds is the part nobody posted online. I've a system.
Every honestly shift, I mark a small diagonal scratch in the leather of my left glove, thumbnail, quick. Private, you know, whenever something happens that I know I'll spend the rest of my career trying to classify.
12 years in the household division.
41 scratches.
Some days I think I should have been an archivist instead. Some days I think there's no difference.
Plus, that Tuesday I put scratch 42 into the glove before the shift was even half done.
The group arrived at 10:42.
I clocked them the way you clock weather, not with alarm, but with the body's old instinct that reads pressure changes before clouds form.
4 of them. Mid-20s, maybe.
One girl in a yellow windbreaker with the hood up despite the October sun going at it hard over the palace gates. 2 men in the kind of trainers that cost 400 quid and were designed to look like they cost 40.
The third man, the one who mattered, though I didn't know.
That yet, wearing a plain grey hoodie and holding a phone like it was a weapon he hadn't cocked yet.
They stopped 12 feet from Corporal Daniel Howe. Howe had been on post since 9 o'clock. 1 hour 42 minutes, and long enough that his jaw had settled into the particular set that the experienced ones get, not rigid, not relaxed, somewhere between the two that takes years to learn and can't be faked. He was positioned at the sentry box on the east side of the forecourt, bearskin level, rifle at the carry. 6'1" in his boots. Built like a man who'd been told he was furniture and had decided, privately, to disagree. The tourists did, I mean, what tourists do. Photographed, and retreated. Photographed again. These 4 didn't photograph. They assessed. The one in gray, I'll call him Gray, because I never got his name and the report I later filed used that designation and I'm too tired to change it now. Gray said something to the others I couldn't catch from my position near the gate. Windbreaker girl laughed, and the 2 trainersmen exchanged looks. Then, Gray walked to within 4 feet of Howe and stopped. This is already a violation of the guidance. The guidance the palace publishes, the gentle suggestions on laminated cards near the entrance, requests 3 meters of clearance. Not a law. A request. A request that most people, standing that close to a man holding a rifle with a bayonet fixed, choose to honor. Gray wasn't most people, or was performing not being most people, which amounts to the same problem. He started talking, and, low, steady, watching Howe's face for microfractures. I've heard it before. For what it's worth, variations on the theme. You can blink, basically, mate, nobody's watching. Go on, just once. What would happen if you laughed? Plus, are TBH, you even real? Do they pay you enough for this? I'd go mad, You must be mad. The commentary like, that mistakes stillness for absence, that reads a man's discipline as evidence that no man is home. Howe's eyes didn't move. Gray escalated, they always escalate, it's physics, it's ego compounding, and stepped to within roughly 18 inches. I was already moving from the gate, which is protocol, which is my job,
which is the moment where most of these interactions resolve without incident because the sight of a second uniform approaching changes the arithmetic in the offender's chest.
Gray didn't look, at me. He reached out, and this is the thing I've scratched a mark in my glove for, the thing I've written up and rewritten up and still cannot make sit flat in language. He reached out and tapped the barrel of Howe's rifle. Not hard. Not with, I guess, intent to grab. A tap. Index finger. In my opinion, metal. Plus, once. Like he was checking if it was real. In the 4 years before that Tuesday, I'd watched Howe hold position through a stranger's full rendition of God Save the King sung deliberately off-key 6 inches from his face, stand unmoved while a child spent 11 minutes trying to tie his bootlace, maintain composure during an anti-monarchy protest that got close enough that I could smell the paint on the placards. Howe was, in the particular, technical vocabulary of the division, exemplary. What happened actually next wasn't in any report I've filed. Because what happened next took 4 seconds, and, in those 4 seconds, the report I filed was the true one. Contact was made with issued equipment, standard verbal warning was delivered, civilian withdrew, but the true account, the one I'm scratching into something less official, is different. Howe didn't look at Gray. He looked at the rifle. Not at the tap. Not where the finger had been. He looked at the rifle the way a man looks at something borrowed, something that doesn't belong to him but that he's been trusted with, has carried 10,000 miles in his mind, has held at attention through cold and crowd and boredom and loss, and someone has just put a careless finger on. His voice, when it came, wasn't loud. Step back. 2 words. Parade ground projection stripped down to bedrock. The kind of voice that doesn't come from the throat at all, that comes from whatever is underneath it, marrow, maybe, or memory. Gray stepped back, and not the half-step of a man complying with a request. A full step. Pretty much, both feet. The involuntary kind, the kind the body takes when the brain receives information it hasn't finished processing yet. Windbreaker girl had stopped laughing. I was at Gray's shoulder by then. Standard position, standard language, sir, I'm going to ask you to move back to the public area, and I watched his face in the moment after Howe's voice landed. There was something in it that I see sometimes, that I never know what to do with. Not fear exactly. Actually, something more like recalibration. The face of a person who has been operating on a comfortable assumption about the world, about this man, about what this man is, about the distance between a uniform and a person inside it, and has had that assumption revised in under a second, by 2 words, by a tone. He didn't argue. He went. They all went, back toward the public area, the phone never having been raised for filming, the dare having been taken and, whatever had been expected, flinch, embarrassment, content for the internet not having materialized into anything postable. 12 feet away, Howe's eyes had returned to the middle distance. 48 minutes on post. Jaw back to the same set. Bearskin level. Rifle at the carry. I put the scratch in my glove. He never looked at me. 14 minutes after Gray and his group cleared the forecourt, it started raining. October rain, the London kind, not dramatic, not honest, just a gray omnipresent damp that makes everything smell like wet wool and mild resentment. The tourists retreated toward the gift shop and the covered walkway near the south gate. The forecourt thinned out to a handful of stragglers with optimistic umbrellas. Howe didn't move. I've stood post in rain. I've stood post in rain with a fever of 38.4 that I didn't report because I was 23 and afraid of looking soft. I know what the cold water feels like working through the bearskin, the weight gain as it soaks, the particular misery of uniform wool against a wet neck. I'm not sentimental about it. It is what you signed for. But I watched Howe stand in that rain and thought, not for the first time, not without discomfort, what does a man do with all of it? Not the rain, the accumulation. Every interaction that shaves at something, every face that looks at you and sees spectacle. Every dare that treats a person like a fixture. Every day of performing absence so thoroughly that you wonder, during the long quiet hours, whether you've got absence confused with something else. Whether the stillness is a discipline or a disappearance. I've 42 scratches in the leather of my gloves and I've never once asked how many he's in his. We rotated at 11:30.
Another Corporal Marsden, who has a habit of rolling his ankles on the sentry box step and, pretending it didn't happen, took the east side post.
I walked how off. This is procedural, which standard rotation.
I walk the relieved guard back through the internal gate, note the time, initial the log.
30 seconds of side-by-side movement. That's, technically, the closest thing to a private conversation the job permits on the forecourt.
I said, gray hoodie.
Howe said, yes, sir.
He said it the way a man says yes, sir, when what he means is something longer. Heavier and, not for this corridor and, not for this rank differential and, possibly not for language at all.
You were, I think, right to warn. Thank you, sir. We reached the internal gate.
The log, which he should have gone through to the changing room, should have been 12 feet down the corridor before I said the next thing.
I said, you looked at the rifle. He stopped. Not a pause. A stop, and the kind with weight behind it.
He turned, half turned, just enough, and I saw his face do something I've no word for in the report language I was trained on.
It wasn't surprise.
It was the expression of a man who has been carrying something he assumed was invisible and has just been told it's a shadow.
He said, did I, sir? It wasn't a question.
I let it sit there between us and the corridor, the strip lights buzzing faintly overhead, the faint echo of the outer forecourt through the stone, Marsden's bootfall somewhere behind us rolling an ankle on the sentry step almost certainly, and, I thought, I could leave it.
I should leave it. This isn't my territory. I'm an officer, he is a corporal. The log is annealed. The rotation is complete. Why the rifle? I said.
Not him, and the rifle. Howe was quiet long enough that I started to think he'd decided the question didn't deserve an answer, which is a right he'd have earned and a call I'd have respected. The for what it's worth, household division doesn't produce men who overshare. It produces men who hold things with a particular steadiness that an outside eye might mistake for not feeling them.
He said, 14 years, sir. That rifle's been at every posting. Every public duty, which every funeral. Pause. He put his, finger on it like it was a toy. He said it without inflection. No bitterness, no performance.
Just the sentence, clean and flat, and, underneath it, everything the sentence contains that assent words.
I thought about the first funeral I stood. The weight of the silence.
The particular quality of a crowd being quiet because they are asked to be versus the quality of a crowd being quiet because something in the air has made speech feel wrong.
The second kind.
The way in my opinion, rifle weight registers differently on those days. How you carry the rifle and the day and the obligation of the silence all at once and don't put any of it down until you're alone somewhere that isn't official. 14 years of that, which one careless finger?
I said, understood.
He said, sir.
Turned.
Went through the gate, and I stood in the corridor for longer than I should have. The strip light above the third sconce has been flickering for 6 weeks. I've logged the maintenance request twice, nothing, and it pulsed now in the damp air, throwing the corridor into a half-second of shadow and, then, back to yellow.
Pretty much, shadow.
For what it's worth, yellow, which shadow?
I thought about how the job looks from the outside.
The way it gets filmed and posted and laughed at and shared. Look at the stiff soldier, look at him not reacting, isn't it funny? That for what it's worth, he's a person and we can treat him like a prop and he can't say anything back. The low-grade, well-meaning cruelty of people who have decided that endurance is something you can poke at without cost because the person enduring is too professional to bill them for it.
The cost is real.
It, in my opinion, is just not always visible and it's almost never paid on schedule.
Howe was in the changing room by then. Bearskin off, presumably. Rifle in the rack.
14 years of postings and public duties and funerals, momentarily laid down on the bench beside him.
I opened my log. I guess, wrote the time. Annealed the rotation.
Closed the book, which then, I stood there with the pen still in my hand and thought about what I should add, what the full account would look like, whether full account is even a category that the log permits.
I think, the strip light pulsed. Shadow. Yellow. I put the scratch in the glove. 43, I closed my hand around it and walked back to the gate. The four of them came back at 14:20. I know, because the log has it. I know because I was at the south gate when they re-entered the forecourt, and I recognized the yellow windbreaker before I recognized the faces, the way you recognize trouble, not its features, just its shape. Gray wasn't filming this time. That was the first thing I noticed, phone in his pocket. Hands loose. Something different in the posture, the swagger that had been running the morning operation was still present but quieter, like a volume knob turned 2 clicks to the left. Not gone. Look, recalibrated. Marsden was on, to be fair, the east side post. They walked past him without stopping. They came to stand, the four of them, at roughly the same 12-foot distance from the sentry box where Howe had been posted that morning. But Howe was inside by then, off rotation, and the man in the sentry box was Private Aldous, who has been with the division for 18 months and who I like enormously and who's, if I'm being honest with the log and with myself, still learning what the stillness costs. I watched them stand there. Windbreaker Girl had her phone out now, pointing it at Aldous. The two trainers men were talking to each other, low, glancing. Gray was looking at the sentry box the way you look at something you came back to finish a thought about. He wasn't, I realized, looking at Aldous, and he was looking at the position. The sentry box. The forecourt stone. The specific geometry of standing in that spot in that uniform with that rifle while the world goes around you and occasionally decides to test whether you're real. I moved. Not urgently, and urgently draws attention, changes behavior, shifts the scene in ways that obscure what you're actually trying to read. I moved with the particular pace of a man whose route through the forecourt happens to pass near 4 tourists, whose clipboard happens to need consultation at this juncture, who has anything but procedural backdrop. I stopped within earshot. Gray said to Windbreaker Girl, not performing for me, not aware of me. It wasn't a game though, was it? She said, Tom, I'm saying it wasn't a game. Pause. That bloke this morning. He wasn't, he stopped. Searched for the word with the particular frustration of a man who uses language casually and has bumped into a situation language doesn't work through casually. He meant it. One of the trainer's men said something I didn't catch. A deflecting thing, tone of voice like come on, mate, lighten up, the social immune system trying to neutralize seriousness before it spreads. Gray didn't lighten up. He basically said, my granddad did 3 years in the army. Never talked about it. Mum said he said it wasn't for talking about. Beat. I put my finger on that bloke's rifle and he didn't move and then he spoke and he stopped again. I'd been in this job long enough to know what that stopping means. I've felt it myself, the first time I understood what the ceremonial weight actually weighs. The moment where something you've looked at as decoration reveals that it's load-bearing, that the whole architecture of something you didn't know you to be fair, needed is resting on it, and you've just carelessly, laughingly, daring ly put your hand on the beam. I want to apologize, Gray said. Windbreaker Girl said, he can't receive an apology. I know he can't. Sharp, and not at her. At the situation. I know he can't. He turned and looked directly at Aldous in the sentry box. Aldous, who had been on post 22 minutes and was doing fine and was completely unaware that he was standing in a spot that had, for hours earlier, held a conversation that this young man with his phone in his pocket had apparently not been able to stop thinking about since. Gray stood honestly there for a moment. Then, this is the part I've not filed, the part I'm not sure belongs in a log at all, he came to attention. Not soldier's attention, and nothing like it, technically. Heels not together, hands not right, jaw not set. The attention of someone who has seen it done and is attempting it with the tools available, which are a body that has never been trained to hold still, and a genuine, slightly desperate desire to offer something to the space where the apology cannot go. He held it for maybe 6 seconds. Aldous didn't react. Because Aldous is a professional in progress and he was on post and the instruction, the ancient unglamorous instruction that's the whole job compressed to its skeleton, is hold the position. Gray lowered his pretty much hands and stepped back. Turned. He walked past me, through me, almost, The way people move when they are inside a feeling that has used up all their exterior attention, and I smelled the October rain still in his windbreaker. I saw his jaw working on something he hadn't finished thinking. I watched the four of them cross the forecourt and out through the public gate and turn left and get absorbed by the tourist scatter of the afternoon. I stood, to be fair, on the forecourt stone. The strip light, to be fair, above my head. No, there's no strip light out here. I keep confusing the corridors. The flat pale October sky above my head went from gray to a slightly darker gray. Marsden rolled his ankle on the sentry step. Aldous held position. The palace behind me ran its enormous, indifferent clockwork. I thought about how in the changing room with the rifle in the rack. About what he'd said in the corridor, 14 years. Every funeral. About the way Gray had stood, crooked, untrained, slightly ridiculous, and offered his 6 seconds of stillness to a spot where a man he'd tried to embarrass had stood every day for 14 years and been real in ways that weren't visible until the moment he was tested, until a careless finger on borrowed metal revealed the whole interior architecture of a person's life at once. I opened my glove, which looked at the scratch. TBH, then, I thought, no. I thought, this one is different. This one I'm not going to compress into a mark in the leather and close my fist around and carry until the glove wears through. I don't know what I'm going to do with it instead. There's a personnel file on how that I've never read beyond the operational summary. 14 years. 3 campaign medals. 1 commendation I've seen on the record and don't know the story behind. There's a door to the changing room that I've walked past every day for 4 years and knocked on precisely never. The October sky went darker. I'd the clipboard in my hand and no reason to stand still. I stood still.